And welcome everybody of the HOU.SEC cast, the HOU.SEC.CON podcast. How you doing, Sam?
I am hunky dory. How are you doing,
I'm
Michael?
good. Well, I'm excited to have Darin Fredde on. Darin is the cybersecurity manager at Stratus, and he's been doing a lot of pen testing stuff for quite a while. His talk at HOU.SEC.CON was all about architecture versus actual security and how you do continuous penetration testing to make sure that the tools you put in actually do what the marketing guy said that they do. So, kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal.
Oh,
Yeah, definitely kind of a big deal.
Yeah. So he's got some good use cases. So I'm excited to talk to him. So let's get to it.
Let's go.
And Sam, we're here with, like I always say, a special guest, but I'm excited to have him on. Darin Fredde, how you doing, Darin?
Hey, Michael. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. So Darin is the cybersecurity manager at Stratus, and he's going to be going over his talk today. Sam, I know you're excited about this talk, right?
Totes McGoats.
Yeah, no, Sam, we joke about stuff for Sam's
Small words, Sam. Small words.
small words. Yeah, like I'm
I
not
will speak
technical.
very slowly. Very
Sam,
slowly.
a lot of people don't know that Sam comes with an engineering background. He's a lot smarter than he lets himself out to be. He just wants to play the dumb sales guy sometimes, but he's a smart dude.
Because it's so beneficial. People don't realize. I mean, don't put that
Yeah.
out there. People are going to know.
Oh man, yeah, it's gonna mess his
Now they're going to
game up.
hold him accountable. What's wrong with you, Michael?
It's gonna mess his game up.
Mhm.
Well, he used to be my sales guy, and I picked up on pretty quick, but that's okay. All right, let's talk about the latest news stuff. So we've got an article here, which Darin, I thought you would appreciate. It's all about how some expired domains out there from attackers let other attackers get a hold of them, and also let security researchers who are trying to stop those attackers from doing bad things with those domains. They took them over. So the reason I thought it was funny is just I I think we've all said this. Anybody who's involved in any kind of pen testing or threat research or anything over the years has said that the bad guys are often just as bad or worse than we are at things like OPSEC or just basic security functionality or IT function, any of the operations, processes, procedures, that kind of thing. And this one's all about some bad guys leaving a uh, bunch of back doors or a bunch of systems open, a bunch of expired
Shells. Yeah.
shell. Yeah, a bunch of shells sitting out there. They got like over 4,000 back doors that are just sitting out there, and they just haven't done anything with them. They've sat there and it got it expired, and now you got a bunch of researchers out there grabbing them. This one was specifically Watchtower Labs. They registered over 40 domains that had backdoors. They were designed to um, build out their command and control infrastructure. They said they were in partnership with Shadow Server Foundation, so they had probably sinkholed a lot of these domains. It was just, I just thought it was interesting. Nothing like crazy, fantastical or anything, but just thought it was funny. So what's your take on it, Darin?
Well, the thing I like the most about it is creativity. If you notice and catching people in their blind spots, that that's the one thing that always really inspired me about pen testing is um, how to take conventional wisdom, the way that we think we understand something, and then all of a sudden you come at it at this angle nobody expects. And I like the way the researchers did that. They probably had that in mind for a while, and they were ready to pounce. And then once it came open to them, and they knew that it was something the attackers kind of, let's call it, eat off the enemy. The enemy had kind of made a mistake. They executed, and it kind of has a double. What I like about it has a positive, part of it too is that they did it in an ethical way to take those off the market. At the same time, they're doing the community a good service by making them aware of it. I have more, but I'll kind of wait for you to ask me more questions about it. But I loved it. I kind of sat there and read it over and over again, and that's the stuff I live for.
for me, it went a totally different route. I'm looking at that going, I'm already paranoid losing my own domain. So I've got a reminder, that tells me to go renew every 5 years or what. I do always do the maximum, right? So I don't lose it. But then I'm also thinking, I'm going to forget about this with so many years. So come, January 30 and 30 or 2032, I'll have to renew again or whatever it is. And so I have my reminder, but I thought it was funny to have all that stuff because I know another guy that registers domain after domain after domain constantly. And I don't know how you
Yeah.
keep up with that, Michael. So,
Well,
yeah.
it's called turn on auto renew and have it remind you, so I don't have to remember some of that stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, I do a lot of things when I come into um, infrastructure, whether I'm approaching it from a blue teamer standpoint um, or just curious. I always look at people's attack surface like that for any subdomain takeovers and things
Mhm.
like that, because I know that the enemy does that. They spend a great deal of time of trying to work those angles. One that I was going to tell you, throw you a little curveball here, Sam. One thing that caught my attention is part of the talk that we'll get into later, was I was talking about architecture, which I won't get into. We'll talk about that later. But that talk was about one thing I said was not allowing the pen tester to do the full life cycle. And when people don't really understand offensive services and testing, they may turn it into a red team exercise, cut the pen tester off. He can't finish his full life cycle, therefore he can't clean up properly. And that can occur, has occurred to me before where people have misunderstood testing. And then the other thing is that they turn it into a red team exercise when it's really a pen test. And we'll get into more of that later. But those were a couple of things from my experience that pointed out. I was like, oh, yeah, I've seen that happen where I had to beg the guys, hey, listen, you don't understand. I was right in the middle of a POC. You need to ensure you clean that server up, because that typically happens at the very end and post exploitation, all these things that we're talking about that were taught in P-TEST, it happens later on in the life cycle if you're doing that type of testing. If you're doing compliance-based testing, it can be missed. So that's part of the reason why I developed the talk.
yeah. If they're not going in there and cleaning some of this stuff up, and they're in the middle of it, it does make me wonder how many times they got maybe interrupted in their attacks when they were trying to, put the whole thing together and somebody got in the way. Or, I mean, who knows? I mean, that could have been another gang. I mean, I remember Sam and I both had the same customer, and they had a gang in their environment that constantly sitting in their environment, had just was they couldn't get out of. They had total control of the environment, and we were like, "Well, you need to get some of this cleaned up. You need to do this. You need to do that." And they were like, "Well, you understand, we got another gang that goes and cleans up their stuff for us, and then comes in and puts their own persistence in place, and then that other gang comes back." So we're like, we kind of just let them do because they're so busy cleaning each other's stuff and trying to take their persistence away that we don't have to do anything. And I was just like, okay, if that's the way you want to think about it, but it just
Yeah.
thought it was pretty interesting.
I
That
think a
time
lot of that.
the time the two muggers try to fight over your wallet, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, and
exactly.
you just silently slide out.
Well, I think there's a lot to said. There's a lot of attack vectors that are risks, are hidden risks that set behind post exploitation, right in between what we'd call a red team exercise versus a pen test. And if you're doing compliance based pen tests, like I said, and the group has a different understanding of the pen test, and you don't get to complete and find all those attack paths, which continuous pen testing does nowadays. You miss some of those. So those were kind of some interesting things I found, from an offensive standpoint, about that test and everything. And then plus the need to do continuous pen testing. It's just another evidence that, a snapshot in time is just not good enough anymore.
Yep. Well, we're going to dig into that, and when we talk about your talk, very much so. So thanks for the all the comments on this. And on the other
Love
side of
it.
the break, we will dig into all things about Darin and then get into his talk. So enjoy the break. We'll see you in just a second. And we are back. So Darin, this is the part of the show where we talk about you. And we want to spend the first few minutes, like we always do, getting an idea of what got you into pen testing, into this whole space in general. I know you and Phil have known each other a long time. I don't know how much he was involved in that story. He's obviously a friend of the show and a friend of the conference as well. So I want to get your rundown, man. What got you into cyber? What got you into pen testing? Why do you like it? Why do you keep doing it?
Well, it gets me out of bed in the morning. I personally believe that I've kind of gambled on my whole career on the fact that I believe offensive services and are the way to build models to really understand risk. I think it's the best thing we have today to really understand, complicated risk items with impact. But I didn't start that way. I started, I've been about 20 plus years for me. I started originally in telecommunication. I met Philip, as you mentioned. I'll go ahead and layer him in the story because he is how I transitioned into pen test. So I met him in 1995. We were both in computer CAD operators. He's got a good talk if you want to hear about the way I started. So I'll give you the short version. But I started as a CLEC and ILEC days before browsers were around and everything. And at that time, I really didn't think much of security. I was chasing the IT like everybody. I wrote all that up until I was a CIO for a bulk liquid carrier. And about that time, it was post September 11th. That's when I really started kind of really getting interested in cybersecurity. So I kind of retooled. At that time, I went to school at the same time I was a CIO. And I had intentions of basically, bridging back in. And so I started out like most people, I guess, what I'm saying is IT. And then since then, I've been in, I've held many roles: security architect, security analyst. I've been a security engineer, and I've been a consultant for a company with local governments. I've done pen testing the local governments. I also teach at a university. I teach a ethical pen testing course at Dallas College.
Oh, yeah.
I've been doing that for about 6 years. I also heavily involved in the community. I run the North Texas Cybersecurity Group here in Texas. And then how I got into pen testing was I was pretty miserable on the architecture side. I was a security architect for a company, and I was having difficulty getting the audience to understand the impact of something. And I was real frustrated with it. And Phil said, hey, man, why don't you just come over here and be a pen tester? And at the time he told me, I was like, man, I've never done pen testing in my life. How could I do that? And he said, man, you don't really understand. You would be really good at it. And that's how it all started. I went in to a bank, one of the largest banks in the U.S. I felt a bit like I needed to keep my mouth shut, for a year. And I did. About a year, I watched things. And then I was studying the attacker at the same time. And I just felt like, there's a big difference between what we're doing and what attackers do. And I talked to a couple of the guys that were running the group, and basically what ended up happening, Michael, Sam, is they turned me loose. They took the cuffs off of me and basically allowed me to start hacking. And I would start from a Windows box and just start hacking from where I was at. And that led into a lot of problems, discoveries within the bank and everything, as you would expect. And this was kind of prior to living off the land was still around. It was still very popular, but the BAS wasn't around at that time and quite made the scene. And so I was going to Phil, and I was like, what do we call this? Because I can't really call it pen testing because, they're a little longer. I'm not doing red teaming, but yet I am emulating a threat. So I called it full scope adversary emulation. And I'm sure your viewers are wanting to argue with me right now about definitions of pen testing. But that's what I was saying earlier is one thing I noticed about that method is that it allowed me to do the full life cycle, but it also blurred the lines between traditional pen tests, even though I wasn't being covert. So I did that, and then I developed the product out of it for a side company, and I did both of them for about 6 years, and that's where the talk came from,
Yep.
from my experience of doing all that.
Well, that's a good lead into the talk. But I mean, I think what you talked about before, and Sam and I've had this conversation with a few of our guests, is like some of us that are a little bit long in the tooth. That's kind of where we came from, was that IT background, and then moved into the security architecture background. And I think Sam, you would agree that it gets you a lot of experience. That it's not a young kids don't know what they're doing these days kind of conversation. It's just we've come up in it in a different way, and we're not entering security kind of from like an analyst perspective or something.
It's good to have the fundamentals. It's good to understand what you're trying to protect to begin with. So I don't think anybody can go into a cyber security position without understanding what they're actually, what the crown jewels are.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree, Sam. I think it's kind of think like an admin. A lot of people say think like an attacker, but when you're the you're the offense. I'm thinking like the admin. Like, when do you take your breaks? When do you go on deal? Are you trying to find the agent? Is there a guy in the SOC that's spending all his time trying to figure out why his agent's falling offline? Because that human complacency, the human factor, and the misconfiguration of the vulnerabilities are the things I'm looking for. I'm looking for those rare moments that make people go, what? Like, I like to use this one as an analogy, if you don't mind, Sam. I at one job, I'd use the bus driver's credential. So just saying that out loud, I'll repeat it again. I use the bus driver's credentials. The ludicrousy that a bus driver would have credentials is your first knee-jerk reaction. And I used it because of the human factor of making you pause, like, what? And then I used that to not do what you expected me to do. I went after sensitive data, straight for the sensitive data. I don't really care if you think I'm elite. I'm there for a mission. And I just always kind of thought that way. And my background helps me in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's use this as a segue then.
Okay.
Darin, let's get into your talk. So the talk is all about you, and you said the word before. It's around marketecture, so marketing height to basically line that up against real security validation of the controls. You're doing that through offensive testing. You said the acronym BAS. I think a lot of people, some people do, some people don't know. That's breach and attack simulation. And then you've got the automated pen testing that you talked about. You kind of built that out and did that a while back before those had kind of started hitting the market in a large way. I think the first one was probably what that most people know about anyway, would be like what Veridin that got bought by who they get bought by. I think Mandiant owns them now. FireEye, Mandiant, all that good stuff that's now part of Google Cloud. So this is a topic that, I mean, I've said in the past when I first saw breach and attack simulation tools come out, that kind of thing, I was like, look, if I was a new CISO walking in the door, I would, as much as possible, stop all new tools getting implemented, and I would put something like this in. And I know there's problems getting it implemented. There's always issues getting some of these tools implemented in an environment, but I would put something like this in to validate the controls that I had before I implemented anything else. And I think that's not the full scope of your talk, but I think you would probably agree with that.
Yeah, maybe not the acronym, but the intent. Yeah, the continuous pen testing. Yeah, I would agree 100%, Michael. And I had a lot of bumps and mistakes along the way. A couple of times I got accused for, hey, you're doing an undisclosed pen test. That's like, what's an undisclosed pen test? Just ridiculous stuff. And it it's just a lot of mistakes I made, like getting caught up in the ego because
Mhm.
I was really good at stealing passwords. I mean, I could steal a lot of passwords and I was real good, but I was embarrassed about it because I was thinking, this isn't elite, this isn't me. But it works, I can do credential shuffle and, I can really own this environment and take over the doors and, and the cameras and just full ownage of an environment. And it disturbed me that it was that I could do that. And then I never was really trying to test the red team, I mean the blue team in those tests, but I would get accused of it a lot, and I'd try to say, okay, I tell you what, I'll send you an email every time I start a test. We good with that? And I would do things like that, and I would explain to them, look, if credentials are in my scope and your security compliance device is configured, you can bet your ass I'm going to tamper with it. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to jack with your environment, and I'm going to leverage the architecture. And it took a while, to kind of get people to come around, but it exposed so many different findings, and it created different problems too. One of the bigger problems it created, Michael, was these are not findings; these are projects. I think Phil said that at one time, and they were because they were gross misconfigurations within the security architecture. So there's where the talk kind of came together.
Validation then, I mean, when you're talking about marketing versus reality, what I and correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the things I got from your talk was that they they got the marketing that says it can do this. It may be 100% capable of doing that. But if you as the architect or whoever that are implementing that tool don't one turn everything on based on your environment that's key to your environment to stopping attacks, and two, you don't monitor those things and you don't watch them, the validation of those is going to fail because you're not doing what you should do with this tool. It to me it came down to a little bit of sometimes some laziness on the implementation side of it. Is that a fair assessment?
And the lack of testing. I mean, if you kind of, here's what kind of caught me off guard is, and I don't know I'm right about this. It came from kind of a thesis. I kind of worked backwards, see this problem, and then try to prove myself wrong or right. And one thing I saw is that if you've been around a long time, Sam and guys, you remember we used to have CTO. So we'd have a CIO and a CTO. And it was the IT was innovation. Then we got rid of the CTO, so the chief technology officer is gone. And then I noticed this lack of vision for your architecture. It would just build sporadically. And it was, if one could, I could argue that you're architecting your security architecture on the back of IT architecture. It's scaffold on it and it's interlaced, right? Layer defense. And I just noticed this lack of vision of where you were going, this overlapping sprawl of tools, and no testing. Would take a product, you wouldn't take a product as a software development company and put it into a customer's environment without testing it, right? So why the hell would you do that with your security architecture? And I noticed that they did, when I would Google search, it's very hard to find one person responsible for it. A lot of people will tell you, well, the chief security officer is responsible. Really? For setting the vision and this complex architecture? No offense to chief security, for CISOs, but and then maybe say the security architect would do it. Well, really? He really is over one area. So then I thought, well, there's really not a role for this. And that's what's allowing me to wiggle in between these systems is because of this gap, between things and no efficacy testing. And that's when I came up with, thinking, oh, there needs to be continuous pen testing. Now, that wasn't me trying to claim I came up with that for the whole market. I just was kind of in line with their thinking at the same time.
But this also kind of makes me think about the situations I've been in where I've seen some of the pen testing happen, et cetera, where customers basically have the cutoff point saying, don't go any further, or want to change the outcome of the verbiage in the assessment, right? That comes back to them, and some of that I'm sure is CYA, but like, what's the point? And I think if there was one thing that I got that kind of gave me a little bit of an aha moment when I was watching your thing was it not just talking about it as a pen test, but as offensive security testing, right? And that changes, for me, that changes the perspective of what we're doing here, right? It's not just trying to get in somewhere and try to knock things down. It's much more than that. It's ensuring, like you're talking about, is finding the right architecture and the things you need to fix, right? Or did I misunderstand that, or is that kind of where you were headed?
No, you nailed it, Sam. There's a lot of problems with, I personally think, with offensive testing in general, because of compliance really helped us out, right? We get a lot of testing done, but there's this need to, if you're a person who knows how to do that type of testing full scope, and you can attack and really own the environment, stopping the attacker before he finishes can make you have a false understanding of your security. And that's, if you're doing snapshots in time, you're not necessarily going to find all those attack paths. So if you get social engineered, somebody drops on your box in a Windows environment and starts moving laterally, you may not see that he can export software through Grammarly. I know that sounds ridiculous, but what if you're locked down and then he goes and he's filtering data? That's a post exploitation type scenario, but so it requires a different type of testing, and that's why I started doing that. I was actually surprised the market bought it. There was quite a few customers, local governments, that and use cases I do in my talk, and all of those bought that product, full scope adversary orientation. That's the way it was pitched, and that's the way they bought it. And some of them would allow me to really take the gloves off and pen test.
So you talk about use cases. Before we close this off, when I was watching your talk, one thing just cracked me up, was when you were attacking that company, the helicopter company, and y'all were watching videos, and there was this one video on a boat. What can you tell us about this? Because it cracked me up.
Okay. Yeah, there was a buddy of mine, because at that time I wanted to create this. I collaborate better. So that's why I like the blue team, red team scenarios, because I like having authentic dialogue, checking your ego at the door and talking about problems, realistically. So I had a friend of mine and we were doing the test, and the whole test, the thing we want to see is we want to see the helicopter flying around and all that spy stuff, in video. And so it's a good friend of mine. And we finally, at the last of the test, we had gained access to where we owned everything. We were watching video, having popcorn, watching these people get arrested. And there was this one boat, and this guy was getting arrested. And my eyes fixated on a dog, because I'm a dog lover. And I was like, oh, there's a dog on board. And they were arresting him. And as I was like, they're going to leave the dog. And then sure enough, they arrest him and they just drive off. The boat's sitting there. So we made this whole skit out of they left the dog, and that became like the dominant factor. And then we had all these jokes and everything about the dog swimming and sharks getting it. And it was,
Oh
of
my
course,
gosh. Well,
it was totally fiction. I'm sure the local, department went back and got the dog. But yeah, that was a pretty cool test. That was I can't reveal the client, but I can tell you that it was around the United States. And to be specific, we didn't do anything to helicopter. We just did the streams, that officers would get.
yeah,
I
it
hear
was
they
video.
trained that dog to be a pen tester later on.
Yeah, he was resentful. I talked to him. He was really upset. He said, "I am a good dog." No, I'm just
Now give me a milk bone.
Yeah, I was watching that. It just cracked me up. So I was,
it was
all I
funny.
could think was like, I hope they got that dog out of there.
That's what I got caught up on. I was like, screw the guy get arrested. Go back and get the dog.
Go get the dog.
Yeah.
Well, Darin, I really appreciate it, man. Thanks for going through that again. Thanks for supporting HOU.SEC.CON, coming out and talking as well. It was really
My
good to
pleasure.
have you out. So any parting thoughts?
No, I just want to tell you, I really appreciate it. Hopefully that our discussion has, impressed upon the users, the need for continuous pen testing and then doing it at scale. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Sam?
No, I mean, good stuff. And I learned a few new things, which is always awesome whenever I can go through a presentation, pick up some new stuff, like new cool words like marketecture and
It's
things.
a portmanteau. I had to look that up. So it's not that I'm that clever. It's a combination of two words. So
Yeah, I've used that a couple of times in my career, and people always get a kick out of it, especially when you find that one person who's never heard it before. They're like, "Oh, that's a cool
a guy
word."
named Luke Hoffman's the one I think that coined that phrase in his book.
Worth looking up. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us with Darin Fredde here.